Hey guys, happy Thursday. My name is Marilyn Acosta, and today we are going to be working in Second Chronicles verses 25. And I think it's going to be an awesome lesson because it actually connects to what we talked about yesterday about guarding your heart. And so we worked out of Deuteronomy 8, and so we're going to connect it to Second Chronicles 25. So let's get started. Um, we're gonna see that in Second Chronicles 25, we're gonna meet a man named Amaziah, who is a king. And he was a king that the scripture said knew the Lord but didn't serve God with a perfect heart. And that just brought me back to what we talked about yesterday, how important it is that we worship God with a heart that is sincere, that we worship Him in truth and spirit. And the only way that we can do that is if we allow the Lord to lead us, to teach us how to worship, teach us how to pray, that we surrender ourselves to Him in every way possible. Remember, we talked about yesterday how important it is that we allow the Lord to show us how to serve Him with our whole hearts, our whole mind, and our whole strength. Because if we rely on our own understanding, we can fall into the trap of pride, of self exaltation, just leaning to our own understanding and not knowing what all can be within our hearts because it takes the Lord to reveal our hearts to us. So I'm going to read verse 1 just to give us a scriptural reference. It says, Amaziah was 25 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 29 years in Jerusalem. And his mother's name was Jehoadan of Jerusalem. And he did that which was right in the sight of the Lord, but not with a perfect heart. And so we see that Amaziah, he knew God. He had a form of godliness, but there lacked sincerity. There lacked a surrendering. There lacked a true relationship with the Most High God. And for us, I think one of the big takeaways that the Lord wants me to share is that we want to make sure that we're not so caught up in religion. We're not so caught up in doing rituals and doing these things that we think please God, but we don't know God. So many times, if you're not careful, you can get caught up in the deception of works. Well, I sing in the choir, I teach Sunday school, I do small group, I go to church every Wednesday and Sunday. And while all those things are wonderful, if you don't know the God, if you don't know the Most High in an intimate relationship in a real way, none of those things can matter because it's so important that we worship Him in spirit and truth. And you can do all of those things and still not know God. And it's so important that we allow the Lord to teach us, that we allow the Lord to purify us, to cleanse us, to renew our minds so that we can serve Him in a way that pleases Him. Amaziah, he found himself in a lot of trouble and he had a lot of issues that ended up manifesting because he didn't know God in the way that he should have. He didn't surrender his life in the way that God would have wanted him to. So we see that in verse 5, he is about to go to war. He has all of these men prepared for battle. He's even paid 100 talents for Israelites to go into battle with him. And the prophet of God comes to him and says, you know what? You only need to take these certain men with you into battle. The Israelites, you can tell them to go home, okay? And he is very disturbed because he feels like, wait a minute, I've invested a lot of money and you're just telling me to tell these men to go home, that we're not going to fight the battle. And the prophet of God says, well, you can go and you can do your own thing, but you're going to fail. You're going to fall. And so he considers that, obviously. And he says, well, what will I get for this 100 talents that I have, just wasted, and the prophet of God, God is so gracious because, here we have this attitude, well, I've invested all of this and I've done A, B, C, and D, and you just want me to drop it? What am I going to get for that? That kind of attitude. But like I said, God is so gracious. The prophet of God says, do you not know that He can give you more than that, what you lost? He's willing to replace everything and give you more. And I think that's such an important lesson because as we are on this journey with God, there are going to be things that He asks us to get rid of. There are going to be things that He wants to strip away from us, but it's for our betterment. It's for us to have the victory. But we have to surrender our ways for His. And nobody gets out of this without having to let go of some things, because it's a sanctification process. As we grow in the Lord, there are things about us that He wants to prune, He wants to take away, so that we can look more and more and more like the image of Christ. But anyways, God is so faithful that when we just give those things to Him, those little things, those big things that we think that we've invested so much, whether it's money, time, efforts, whatever it is, if we just are obedient and we give those things to God, He is so faithful to make sure that we have more abundantly, exceedingly than what we ever expected. He's such a good God. He's such a good Father. But we have to trust Him. And the only way that you can learn to trust Him is by building that relationship with Him that only you can do intimately, getting to know God in a real way, not a religious way, but in a real way. So you see that. And then he goes to battle, and God is so faithful. He gives him the victory. But here we have Amaziah, who begins to be filled with pride, thinking like, wow, I've done all of this. Look at the accomplishments that I have made. And the Bible says he took the false gods of Seir, took them back home, and began to worship them, you all. Can you imagine? God has just given you the victory. And you're going to take the false gods that couldn't even save those people, and you're going to worship them? How foolish, right? But let us not get too arrogant ourselves, because how often has God brought you from a troubled situation? How often has God delivered you from a bad situation? And as soon as things get right, you turn back to your old ways. See, we don't want to be that way. We don't want to be like Amaziah, where, God brings us out of trouble. He gives us the victory, and then we forget and we go back to our old ways. Amaziah lifted his heart to pride. He took those false gods. Now, keep in mind, the commandment said you are not to worship any other God. And here he is taking the false gods of Seir that God just gave him the victory, and he is worshiping them, burning incense to these false gods. He's mixing and mingling the true living God with a false God. You can't do that. God is God alone. You can't have Buddha and Christ. And you see a lot of that lately. You see people trying to mix and mingle all of these false gods, and they want to have the true and living God too. And it won't work. Jesus Christ is the truth, the way, and the light. And it's something that you have to understand. So back to the sacrifice, though, because I thought, when we give up what God asks us to do, or when we obey God's commandments, He's always so faithful to reward us for that, to bless us for that. And one company that I really like is Chick-fil-A, because they are closed on the Sabbath. Now, I know the Sabbath technically is Saturday, but God looks at our heart. Why are you doing what you're doing? And He has blessed that company. They are honoring the fourth commandment, and they don't have their business open on Sunday. And guess what? Monday through Saturday, they make enough business, more than enough, to make up for that Sunday. When we obey God, when we give Him our all, when we worship Him in spirit and truth, and we surrender our ways for His, He blesses us. And I thought that was just such a wonderful example of a company who honors the Sabbath, and the Lord has rewarded them openly, So I thought that was good. So, just back to what we were talking about, about Him bringing the false gods. Don't do that, God. When God delivers you, when God answers your prayers, when He brings you out of the miry pit, don't look back. Don't be like Lot's wife. You want part of the world and you want God too. When Lot's wife looked back, she was looking back to the world, and the Lord turned her into a pillar of salt, because her heart was not truly with God. We have to make sure our hearts are truly surrendered to God. We don't want to be like Lot's wife and we look back. looking back to the past, looking back to the world. We want to move ahead. All right. Let me see. I took a few more notes just to see if I'm missing anything. Oh yeah, God is so gracious. Gracious. He sends the man of God again to Amaziah to tell him, like, look, what are you doing? This isn't right. You can't mix and mingle the false gods with the real true living God. You are going to anger him to wrath. And he silenced the man of God. He did not want to hear from the prophet of God. And that happens so often, believe it or not. God will send men and women into our lives to warn us, to instruct us, to say, you're on the wrong path. Don't go there. And so often, people don't want to hear reproof. They don't want to hear correction. They just want to hear a message that tickles their ears. They just want someone to be the yes man. But you need people in your life that are going to say, hey, stop. What are you doing? This is not honoring God. This is going to lead you to destruction. But sadly, Amaziah silenced him, and so therefore he spoke no more. You don't want to silence the people of God in your life from speaking into your life. Because that could be the very person, the very voice of God, and he's just using them as a vessel, and you deny them. And I think that's a powerful lesson in there. I wish I had more time to talk to you all about it, but I like to keep these messages very short and to the point. You'll see as you read, Amaziah met his fate because of pride, arrogance, and he didn't know God, and he ended up being murdered, killed. It's so important that when we meet the true and living God, when we place our heart on him and worshiping him, that we do so in purity and sincereness, not because we're looking at what can we get. We have to always look at why we're doing what we're doing. What is the motive behind what you're doing? Because if your motive is just to self-exalt yourself, you're not going to have the victory that way. We're here to glorify God, not to glorify ourselves. And when we lose sight of that, that's the beginning of destruction. Remember, pride leads to destruction, and those who exalt themselves will be abased. So, all right, guys, I'm going to leave it here. I hope this message blessed you all. Thank you so much for those of you who subscribed and liked. Your encouraging words, they do mean a lot, and I thank you for that. Thank you for your time, and you all just have a blessed day. Take care.